What is the daily life like for a grad student?
Yeah, so most grad students, they come in, in the morning, but I guess there's kind of two stages. I'll back up. There's two stages of grad school. So when you first start grad school, you take classes, and then after a period of intense coursework, usually have some kind of exam, qualifying exam of some kind, and then you sort of transition into a research period where you're doing research full time. So most of what graduate students do most of their time in grad school is research all day, every day. And that can vary what kind of research you do, what that means. In chemical engineering, there's sort of two broad distinctions. There's theory people and experimental people, the bulk of whom are experimental people. And so that usually means you come in the morning, you go to the lab, you do experiments, maybe you go to your computer, analyze the data, go back to the lab, right? And you go to lunch, you come back, etc. And so most of it's kind of like a desk lab job, right, where you've worked in a lab before. And there's different kinds of labs, right? So some people work in wet bio labs where they're trying to grow cells, and they curse a lot because their cells die, right? And there's people that work on pieces of complicated experimental equipment. They have a vacuum chamber that they're trying to do deposition or something. So they're instead of there they curse a lot because their vacuum gets broken, right? No. Anyway, but so there's you can imagine, am I trying to take this sort of complicated piece of electronic equipment or vacuum tube or something and get it working, or am I doing wet chemistry, or you might be doing something with fluid mechanics or something else, right?
Mm-hmm.
What my students mostly do is sit in front of a computer and do this all day, and so that's most of what they do. Yeah.
Okay, and along those lines, if I went to grad school, would I have to get a job, or are there like scholarships available?
Yeah, so especially in chemical engineering, not only do you not need a job, you're actively discouraged from getting a job. You get a stipend. So unlike professional school where you have to pay $100,000 a year for the privilege of going to medical school, if you go get a PhD in engineering, and even in our master's program, the tuition is covered and you get a stipend. And the stipend is usually on the order of $25,000 to $30,000, $35,000, and it can depend on the school you go, the cost of living in that place, and whether or not you get a fellowship as to what your stipend is. But that's usually enough that covers your basic expenses, and then you can focus on your graduate studies full time. I think there's many reasons why we give a stipend, but it's one of the reasons is to encourage smart students to not go take that $90,000 job that they get, right? But the other is to have students when they're there not saying, I want to go work at Taco Bell so I can support myself. And we say, no, do this full time, get it done, and then you can go out and work.
Awesome. And how hard do you think it is to have a family while doing grad school?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I had a family. I was married, and we had our first daughter before I started, and then I had two more sons when I was in grad school. My wife had two more children. I think it's challenging but doable. So I know lots of people who had families in grad school, and I think the hardest thing is the finances, right? So if it's you and just a spouse, that's not so bad because your spouse works and you're usually fine. When you have children, then you have to worry either about childcare or if someone stays home, and childcare is expensive. And so if someone works and you have childcare, or if you stay home, then you're trying to live on a stipend. Even then, I think you're able, if you're able to say, I'm going to do this for 4 or 5 years, even if you had to take out a few loans, if you think that's worth the investment, then it's just a matter of being disciplined about your finances at that point.
Okay, and so we talked about jobs and how we're not expected to work.
Mm-hmm.
Are we expected to have an internship at some point?
Yeah, so that most graduate students that I know haven't done an internship, but many graduate students that I know have interactions with industry. So, but there are some graduate students who have internships. I know there's a faculty in our department, faculty member in our department who actively encourages students and actually finds them internship opportunities. And internship is, and usually what we mean by internship is different for a graduate student than an undergrad. So an undergraduate, you think the sort of pace of life is like, I take classes, and when I'm not classes, I'm my own, right?
Mm-hmm.
But graduate school is maybe a little bit more indentured servitude, right? It's not really that. It's graduate school is more like an apprenticeship, okay? And you're spending all your time working on this. So if you take a break to go do the kind of undergrad internship where you go do something completely different, all you're really doing is taking a break from your grad studies, and you're just prolonging your graduation. So a lot of times the kinds of internship opportunities that you get as a grad student are things that are related to what you're doing in your PhD project. So you might be doing something like going to that company where they have, equipment that you don't have, and you're actually getting to take data, right, and use that. And you usually have to work that out with them, but you might use that in your thesis, right? Or you might go and go for a couple of weeks and meet people and share what you've been learning. So a lot of those opportunities to go do internships as a graduate student are just, they're different. They're qualitatively different than what you do as an undergrad.
And how involved is a professor in like the types of projects that the students do, like in the research?
Yeah, so that varies, but again, I think the apprentice model is a good model to think about grad school. So really what you're doing is there's this professor that you're going to end up working for, and you're going to end up working with them closely for years. And your job as a grad student is basically, there's many different things you can say, but one of the ways you can say it is that your job is to learn how to do their job, right? So you watch what they're doing and you're trying to learn how to do what they do. And by emulating their example, you learn how to do research like they do. And so that said, there are different styles. Advisors have different styles of how they work with graduate students. So we usually talk about this on a range of, we call it hands-on, hands-off. So there's like the hands-on professor is the one that walks in the lab every day at 8:38 in the morning and says, how's your experiment going? What are you doing today? And they're sort of more of a micromanager, right? That would be the negative way of putting it. But there's someone who you talk to closely, you know what they're doing every day. Then hands-off is the kind of professor that you see once a month or less, right? So there are a lot of guys who are really, famous. They might have really large research groups. They might have 30 graduate students and 10 postdocs, right? And they're not going to meet with you every day. They're not going to meet with you every week. They're going to meet with you when you have something to say, right? Something to do. And in that environment, you're probably getting more of your mentoring from the people around you, the interactions of the people around you. And that's maybe less of an apprenticeship and more of like here's a creative sandbox and a bunch of smart people go do interesting and important stuff.